I stood before the one man who held absolute, unquestionable power inside the concrete and steel confines of Northwood Correctional Facility. The Warden. His name was Thompson, but to us, he was simply the Warden, a title that carried more weight than any name. The walk to his office had been a gauntlet of its own. Every guard I passed averted their eyes, pretending to be absorbed in their duties. They knew what a summons like this meant. It was either a commendation or a condemnation, and in Thompson's Northwood they were often two sides of the same coin. The air itself seemed to grow thinner, more charged, the closer I got to his door. His office was a shrine to his own ego. It wasn't just a room, it was a statement. Everything was dark mahogany and polished brass, smelling of old leather and expensive wood polish, a scent so out of place in a prison it was dizzying. It was designed to intimidate, to remind any who entered that they were stepping out of the grime of the prison and into the rarefied air of his authority. The centerpiece was a panoramic, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entire prison yard. From here, he could watch the population, the tiny figures of inmates and officers moving below, as if it were his personal, sprawling kingdom and he its distant, untouchable god. He sat behind his massive desk, a fortress of carved wood that separated him from the world. A thin, knowing smile played on his lips, a look that always made my skin crawl. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Those were cold, calculating chips of flint. He thought he had me. He believed that after weeks, months even, of being relentlessly pushed, prodded, and provoked by a select group of inmates, I was finally broken. He imagined I was crawling to him for mercy, begging for a transfer, or worse, admitting defeat. He gestured with a flick of his wrist to the plush leather chair in front of his desk, an honor reserved for those he was about to manipulate or destroy. "Miller," he said, his voice as smooth as aged silk but with an undercurrent of unyielding steel. "You wanted to see me." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air, a question and an accusation in one. "I must admit, I'm surprised. I had you pegged for being made of sterner stuff. The reports I'm getting, it seems Cell Block C is running you ragged. A true shame." He leaned back in his throne-like chair, steepling his long, manicured fingers, the very picture of condescending authority. He was enjoying this, savoring the moment he had engineered. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the entire charade was not for him to win. My reaction, the one the prisoners had been trying to bait out of me for weeks, was never meant for them. It was a missile aimed directly at him. It was a weapon I had been sharpening in the shadows of his own making, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was meant to end him. My name is James Miller. I'm 42 years old, and this is the story of how a calculated, protracted moment of silence became the loudest, most destructive sound in a prison ruled by fear. Northwood wasn't some old, crumbling fortress from a bygone era, with romantic notions of Gothic despair. It was a monument to modern incarceration, a sprawling campus of polished concrete, gleaming stainless steel, and the constant, sterile hum of automated systems. It was sold to the public and the Department of Corrections as the future, clean, efficient, inescapable, and rehabilitative. But that modern shell was just an orderly box designed to contain the messiest, most volatile parts of human nature. The truth was, the sterile environment, devoid of character, history, or warmth, didn't pacify the population, it amplified the tension. The lack of any natural imperfection made the smallest crack in the system, or in a man's psyche, seem like a gaping wound. The air felt perpetually suffocating and thick with unspoken violence, the kind that simmers just below a placid surface. For the 5 years I'd worked within its walls, I walked a tightrope suspended over a pit of vipers. My philosophy was simple, perhaps naive. I believe in rules, in the clear, sharp line between officer and inmate. It's a line that, when respected, keeps both sides safe. It's a necessary structure in a world that operates on the very edge of chaos. But I also made a point to see the men behind the inmate numbers. I saw their stories in the slump of their shoulders, their regrets in the flicker of their eyes, their simmering rage in a clenched jaw. I witnessed their desperate, often twisted attempts to hold on to some fragment of their identity in a place meticulously designed to erase it. I saw their humanity, even when they did everything in their power to hide it behind a mask of aggression. And enthroned at the apex of this whole volatile powder keg sat Warden Thompson. He didn't lead, he reigned. His presence was as cold and unyielding as the steel bars he commanded. In his world, empathy was a liability and absolute control was the only metric of success. Thompson's philosophy was brutally simple: break their spirit, and their bodies will follow. He cultivated an atmosphere so thick with fear and paranoia that even the officers felt like prisoners. We were constantly watched, judged, and pitted against one another. He'd hold staff meetings that were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. He would publicly praise one guard for a minor act of aggression. Officer Smith showed decisive action in the yard yesterday. While subtly chastising another for showing a moment of leniency, Officer Davis seems to be spending a lot of time reasoning with the inmates. We must remember our primary function. He created a culture where cruelty was rewarded and compassion was seen as a weakness to be exploited. We were caught in an impossible middle, trying to enforce Thompson's rigid, often inhumane, rules while dealing with the raw, volatile reality of the men under our watch. It was a battle fought on two fronts, against the inmates who saw our uniform as the symbol of their oppression, and against a warden who saw us as disposable pawns in his grand chess game. And on both fronts I was losing ground. Then Marcus was transferred to my block. From the moment he stepped off the transport bus, the delicate, toxic ecosystem of Cell Block C shifted. He wasn't like the other inmates who relied on brute strength or loud, empty threats. He wasn't the biggest guy, not the most physically intimidating. He was lean, with an unnerving stillness about him. But his mind was lethally sharp. He had a chilling ability to see the cracks in a man's armor, the tiny fissures of insecurity and doubt, and a predator's instinct for how to hammer a wedge into them. His provocations weren't just random acts of defiance. They were surgical strikes, meticulously designed to dismantle an officer's authority, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a humiliated man in a uniform. It began with subtle, almost imperceptible challenges, acts I couldn't possibly write up without looking petty and paranoid. A smirk held a second too long during the morning count, his dark eyes locking with mine in a silent declaration of war that no one else could see. A whispered comment as I walked the block, just loud enough for me to hear but too faint for anyone else to corroborate. "Heard Miller's wife is tired of waiting," he'd murmur to another inmate as I passed, a poison dart aimed at a private life he shouldn't have known anything about. It was a calculated move to plant a seed of doubt, to make me carry the prison's tension home with me. Then it escalated. It became a coordinated campaign of psychological warfare. He and his crew, a handful of inmates who orbited him like planets around a dark sun, would work in concert. He was a conductor, and they were his orchestra of chaos. One afternoon, in the crowded, echoing mess hall, one of his guys would accidentally spill an entire tray of food, creating a biohazard and a slip risk that I was required to handle immediately. As I was cordoning off the area and calling for a cleanup crew, my attention fully diverted, another would start a loud, staged argument on the other side of the room. It forced me to choose which fire to put out, ensuring that no matter my choice, I looked ineffective and overwhelmed. To the inmates, it looked like I'd lost control. To the warden, watching on his ever-present cameras, it looked like I couldn't handle the pressure. They weaponized the prison's bureaucracy against me. It was a brilliant, insidious tactic. They filed a deluge of false grievances and incident reports. Officer Miller used threatening language during shakedown. Officer Miller denied me my allotted yard time out of personal bias. Officer Miller searched my cell without proper cause. Each claim, no matter how baseless, had to be investigated. I was buried in paperwork, spending my evenings writing defenses instead of decompressing. I was forced to sit in endless sterile meetings with Internal Affairs, who treated me with a uniform air of bored suspicion, their faces implying that where there's smoke, there's fire. Every move was meticulously planned bait, designed for one purpose, to make me snap. They were dying for me to lose my temper, to grab one of them by the collar, to put my hands on an inmate and give Warden Thompson the excuse he needed to make an example of me. And Thompson watched it all from his perch, his interest communicated through his lieutenants on the floor. I could feel his eyes on me, burning with a mixture of eager anticipation and growing disappointment every time I failed to take the bait. He wanted me to be the hammer he could use to justify his oppressive tactics. He wanted to be able to say, "See? Even the good officers, the calm ones like Miller, can't handle them without force. My methods are necessary." The pressure was immense, a physical weight that settled on my shoulders the moment I clocked in. The mess hall incident was a turning point. As I stood there, radioing for cleanup, the stench of cheap chili and sour milk filling the air, Marcus watched me from a nearby table. He wasn't laughing. He was observing, studying me, his expression one of cold, academic interest. The noise in the hall was deafening, a cacophony of shouts and banging trays, but in that moment all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I wanted to march over there, to grab him, to see a flicker of fear in his eyes. But I knew that was the trap. That was the checkmate he and the warden were waiting for. I took a slow, deliberate breath, my voice flat and professional over the radio, and went about my procedure. That night, I barely slept. The image of his analytical stare was burned into my mind. The meetings with Internal Affairs were a special kind of hell. I'd sit in a small, windowless room across from two investigators who had the weary, cynical look of people who'd heard every lie imaginable. They'd read the grievance aloud in a monotone voice. Inmate Johnson alleges that on the 14th, you referred to him using a derogatory term. I would deny it, calmly, professionally. That is not correct. I instructed inmate Johnson to return to his cell. They would look at each other, a silent, knowing glance. But he claims you were aggressive. He felt threatened. Do you often make inmates feel threatened, Officer Miller? It was a Kafkaesque nightmare. My own reports, which I filed meticulously, were treated as self-serving, while the coordinated lies of convicted criminals were given equal, if not greater, weight. Thompson had created a system where the truth was irrelevant. The whispers about my wife were the worst. They were the deepest cuts. "Must be hard on her, you being here all the time," Marcus would say to his friend, just as I was close enough to hear. "Wonder if she gets lonely." The poison worked. I'd call home, and if her voice sounded tired, a sliver of doubt would creep in. Was she okay? Was this job, this relentless siege, bleeding into my home life and poisoning it, too? The prison was no longer just a place I worked. It was becoming a presence in every aspect of my life, a cancer that was metastasizing, and Marcus was its primary agent. The stress manifested physically. I lost weight. My hands would shake slightly as I unlocked my car at the end of a 12-hour shift. I was fraying at the edges, and everyone could see it. But as the days bled into weeks, something inside me shifted. I did the one thing none of them, not Marcus, not his crew, and certainly not the Warden, saw coming. I did nothing. I met their manufactured chaos with an unnerving, almost inhuman calm. When they spilled a tray, I radioed for cleanup. When they filed a grievance, I wrote my report. When they whispered about my wife, I stared straight through them, my face a blank mask. I documented every single incident with cold, detached professionalism. My reports, once a defense of my actions, slowly became an indictment of theirs. Read together, they stopped painting a picture of my failure and started painting a crystal-clear portrait of a calculated, organized campaign of harassment originating from a single, coordinated group. I met Marcus's sneering provocations not with anger, but with a flat, unreadable stare that offered him no emotional purchase. I became a black hole for his psychological attacks. He needed a reaction, anger, frustration, fear, to fuel his campaign. I gave him nothing. My silence became a vacuum into which they poured all their efforts, and it drove them crazier than any physical confrontation could have. The other inmates started to notice. The usual dynamic of bait and react was broken. I wasn't playing the game, and it confused them. The Warden, I later learned, saw my restraint as weakness, a sign that I was losing control and would soon implode spectacularly. They were both wrong. My silence wasn't passive. It was active. It was a listening post. While they were all focused on making noise, on drawing my attention, on creating spectacles, I was quietly gathering intelligence. My stoicism became my camouflage. Freed from the need to constantly react, I started to truly see. My senses, previously dulled by stress and anger, became sharp. I wasn't just surviving my shifts anymore. I was observing. While the inmates were busy trying to crack my composure, and the Warden was watching from his tower, waiting for me to fail, I started seeing the prison in a new light. A prison has a rhythm, an invisible current that flows beneath the surface of official routines. It has its own economy, built on favors, fear, and contraband. I had always known this, but I had never understood its true structure. My quiet defiance, however, had unintentionally disrupted Warden Thompson's hidden orchestra, and now I could finally see the conductor. Inmates who used to see just another uniform, another cog in the machine, started to watch me with a different kind of curiosity. Whispers that used to die the moment I turned a corner would sometimes hang in the air for just a second longer, offering me fragments of a larger puzzle. "Laundry shipments light," someone would mutter. "Thompson's cut is getting bigger. Marcus is the only one eating good this week." These were phrases I would have previously dismissed as generic inmate complaints. Now, they were data points. I started noticing the small but significant anomalies. Supply trucks from vendors I didn't recognize, their company logos generic and untraceable, arriving after hours. Their manifests were never logged in the main system. Their cargo was unloaded not by the usual daytime staff, but by a select crew of inmates, Marcus's crew, under the dim, flickering perimeter lights. I saw Marcus, the ringleader of my personal hell, getting subtle perks that were invisible to a casual observer. An extra 5 minutes on a monitored phone call as the supervising guard conveniently looked away. A blind eye turned when a routine search of his cell somehow missed an unauthorized item. A preferred job assignment in the prison laundry, a place I now realized was a known hub for internal distribution. These weren't random acts of luck, they were payments. This wasn't chaos. It was an immaculately organized system. Thompson wasn't just keeping order. He was curating it for his own enrichment. The final horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place late one Tuesday night. I had taken an extra shift, a habit I'd developed to have more time for my observations. I was walking the perimeter of the administrative block, a wing that's usually a ghost town after 6 p.m. A faint sliver of light emanated from under the door of the warden's private records room, a secure area no inmate should ever be near. My instincts, honed by months of hyper-awareness, screamed at me. I moved into the shadows of the adjacent hallway, my soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished floor. I found a spot where a crack in the window blinds gave me a narrow, partial view inside. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Warden Thompson was there, not with his senior staff, but with 2 senior inmates. One of them was Marcus. That alone was a massive, fireable breach of protocol. But what I saw next exposed the entire rotten conspiracy. Thompson, with the same thin smile he had shown me in his office, slid a small, black, leather-bound ledger across his desk to Marcus. Marcus took it, his movements fluid and practiced. He didn't even look at it. Without a word, he turned and slipped it into a hidden compartment inside a maintenance cart full of cleaning supplies that was waiting by the door. In that one, sickening moment, it all made sense. The relentless provocations weren't just about testing my breaking point. They were part of a much bigger, more sinister game. The warden was running a black market, using certain inmates like Marcus as his lieutenants to control the flow of contraband, drugs, cell phones, extra food, that he himself was supplying through those unlogged, after-hours deliveries. He created instability with one hand by empowering inmates like Marcus to harass guards and other prisoners, and then sold the solution with the other, providing contraband that pacified or empowered his chosen partners. The inmates who provoked officers were either trying to get a problematic guard like me removed for interfering with business, or they were simply putting on a show to maintain their position in the warden's corrupt hierarchy. My refusal to react hadn't just confused them. It had made me an unpredictable gear in a very predictable machine. The warden hadn't been testing my patience. He'd been testing my willingness to either break or become complicit in his scheme. Once I knew the truth, I couldn't unknow it. The weight of that knowledge was suffocating, a physical burden. I understood immediately that I couldn't just go to the regional authorities or file a report. Warden Thompson had woven his network of corruption so deep into the fabric of Northwood that any official complaint I made would be intercepted and buried before the ink was dry. He had allies in the regional office, people who owed him favors or were on his payroll. He'd use his power to discredit me, painting me as a disgruntled, unstable officer with a vendetta. He'd use my own meticulously documented reports of Marcus's harassment against me, presenting them as proof that I was cracking under the pressure and fabricating a conspiracy. It would be my word against his, and he was the king of this domain. My career would be over, my name tarnished, and his criminal enterprise would continue unabated. The only way to win was to dismantle his kingdom from the inside, using his own methods, secrecy and strategy, against him. My revenge wouldn't be a shouting match in the yard or a physical brawl. It would be a quiet, strategic demolition. First, I needed irrefutable proof. That black ledger was everything. It was the Rosetta Stone of his corruption, the key that would unlock every door. I spent the next 2 weeks dedicating every spare moment to observation, learning the pattern of the cart and the ledger. It was a nerve-wracking existence, living a double life. By day, I was the stoic, beleaguered officer. By night, I was a ghost, tracking movements, memorizing schedules. The maintenance cart was used by Marcus's crew during the day and was always returned to the same locked supply closet on the ground floor of C Block at the end of the last shift. Getting inside that closet, even for a minute, was the challenge. I needed a distraction, something big enough to pull the Warden's most loyal guards, the ones who were in on it, away from that specific area, giving me a window of opportunity. My chance came from the most unlikely of alliances. An older inmate named Peterson, a quiet man who had been the prison librarian for 20 years, had been watching my silent war with Marcus. He wasn't part of any crew. He was a ghost who survived by being invisible. But he had seen his friends get burned by the Warden system, extorted for protection or punished for refusing to play the game. He cornered me in a secluded aisle of the prison library one afternoon, the air smelling of old paper and dust. His voice was a low, urgent whisper. "You see things, Officer Miller," he said, not looking at me directly but at the spine of a worn copy of the Count of Monte Cristo. "You see the game. The Warden trusts Marcus. But Marcus has enemies he doesn't know about. People he stepped on to get where he is." Peterson, trusting me because I had never once been cruel, gave me the final piece of the puzzle I needed, the exact schedule for a major contraband drop happening in the prison auto shop, a time when the Warden, Marcus, and their key people would be completely focused on the other side of the facility. On the night of the drop, the prison was electric with a low, humming tension that only I understood. Just as Peterson had predicted, the senior guards, Thompson's inner circle, were all discreetly redeployed to secure the perimeter around the auto shop under the guise of a routine security drill. As the prison settled into the tense quiet of the late evening, I made my move. I initiated a low-level lockdown on a different cell block, getting on the radio and reporting a fake fight I'd overheard. "Dispatch. This is Miller in B Block. Have a possible 10 to 36, 2 inmates, Tier 3. Sounds like it's escalating." It was just enough of a procedural headache to be believable, and it officially drew the remaining on-duty patrol guards to the opposite end of the facility, leaving C Block's ground floor deserted. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs as I walked toward the supply closet. The hallway was empty, eerily silent. I used a copied key, a perk of my years of quiet observation and knowing which careless day-shift officer always left his master keys unattended on his desk for 5 minutes during shift change, to slip inside. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot. I closed the door behind me, plunging myself into darkness. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and floor wax. I fumbled for a small penlight. I found the maintenance cart, my hands shaking as I searched for the hidden compartment. It was a false bottom, cleverly concealed beneath a stack of dirty rags. My fingers found the edge and pried it open. And there it was, the black ledger. Pulling out a cheap burner phone I'd bought for this exact purpose, its screen a damning light in the darkness, I began to photograph every single page. My hands trembled, making it difficult to focus. Every footstep I heard in the hallway outside sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I worked methodically, turning each page, capturing the damning evidence. Names of guards on the payroll, dates of illegal deliveries, transaction amounts, payoffs to inmates. It was the complete architectural blueprint of the Warden's criminal empire. After what felt like an eternity, I had it all. The proof was now digital, portable, and undeniable. I placed the ledger back, secured the false bottom, and slipped out of the closet, a ghost melting back into the shadows. My moment came a week later at the mandatory quarterly staff assembly. Every correctional officer, administrator, and department head was there, packed into the large briefing room. The air was stale with the smell of cheap coffee. Warden Thompson stood at the podium, basking in the spotlight. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech about the recent, statistically significant drop in violent incidents, a piece he had personally engineered and secretly profited from. He was at the absolute zenith of his power, a monarch addressing the loyal subjects who either knowingly or unknowingly enabled his reign. As he was pontificating about a new era of stability and control here at Northwood, I stood up from my seat in the back. The squeak of my chair was the first sound to break the spell of his voice. I started walking toward the front of the room. The steady, deliberate sound of my footsteps on the linoleum floor cut through his speech, each step an echo in the suddenly quiet hall. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Officers exchanged confused, anxious glances. Thompson paused, his benevolent mask momentarily slipping to reveal a flash of pure annoyance. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice dripping with the condescension he had perfected, "do you have something to add? Perhaps another complaint about your inability to manage your cell block?" The few guards loyal to him chuckled nervously. I didn't answer him. Instead, I stopped a few feet from the podium and turned to face the assembled staff, my colleagues, my accusers, my allies. "For months," I began, my voice steady, clear, and amplified by the room's tense silence, "Warden Thompson has spoken to us about maintaining order. He has praised us for reducing violence. What he hasn't talked about is how he has personally profited from creating the very chaos he claims to be fighting." Audible gasps filled the room. Thompson's face cycled rapidly from annoyed to incredulous, then settled on a mask of pure, unrestrained fury. "Miller, you're relieved of duty. This is rank insubordination. Security, escort this man out." But before anyone could move, I gave a subtle nod to a trusted colleague at the back of the room, a man who owed me a debt and hated the warden more than I did. With a single keystroke, the large projector screen behind the warden, which had been showing the prison's official logo, flickered to life. The first image that appeared was a crystal-clear, high-resolution photograph of a page from the warden's ledger. It detailed payoffs to 2 senior guards who were standing in that very room, their faces draining of all color. Then another image appeared. And another. Photos of the unlogged supply trucks at the loading dock. A zoomed-in shot of Thompson's clandestine meeting with Marcus in the records room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply narrated the evidence as it appeared on the screen behind the man who thought he was untouchable. As you can see, the warden himself was the primary source of the contraband that fueled the instability. He used inmates, like Marcus, to create problems, and then he sold the solution. I detailed the black market, the orchestrated provocations, the names, the dates, and the web of corruption that had turned Northwood Correctional Facility into his personal kingdom. The room was dead silent, the only sounds my voice and the quiet, damning click of the slideshow advancing from one piece of evidence to the next. I finished with the last, most powerful image, a close-up of Warden Thompson's hand passing the black ledger to Marcus. Then I turned to face him. His face was ashen, a sickly gray. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed, vacant look of a man whose entire world had just been systematically and publicly obliterated. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. A dry, rasping sound was all he could manage. He just stood there, speechless, exposed, and utterly defeated. That was the reaction I had been waiting for all along. Not the manufactured rage of the prisoners, but the profound, world-ending silence of a tyrant who had just lost his throne. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for him. An external investigation was launched by the state's Department of Corrections before the day was even over, triggered by an anonymous email, sent from my burner phone just moments before I stood up in the meeting, containing all the photographic evidence and a detailed narrative. Warden Thompson was suspended on the spot. He was escorted out of his mahogany office not by his loyal security detail, but by two stony-faced state investigators who didn't look at him with fear or respect, but with cold, professional disdain. He was indicted a month later on charges of corruption, smuggling, and racketeering. The system he had so carefully constructed crumbled without its king. The guards on his payroll were fired, and several faced criminal charges themselves. Marcus and his crew, stripped of their protection and power, were swiftly transferred to a supermax facility hundreds of miles away, their power base at Northwood gone overnight. The air inside the prison shifted in a way I had never felt before. The oppressive weight of Thompson's rule, the constant fear and paranoia that had permeated the very concrete, was gone. It was replaced by an uncertain but definite sense of hope. The dynamic changed. The inmates looked at me differently after that. There wasn't animosity, but a strange, quiet respect. I hadn't used force, brutality, or intimidation. I had used the truth as a weapon, and it had proven to be more powerful than any baton or can of pepper spray. My revenge wasn't born from simple hate, but from a desperate need to bring some kind of balance and justice back to a place that had lost its way. It was a dangerous, solitary path, and I know I blurred the line between justice and personal obsession. In the end, it proved that real power isn't about having an iron fist or instilling fear. It's found in the quiet resolve to stand for what's right, even when you have to stand completely alone. The warden's silence in that briefing room was his ultimate defeat, and it served as a testament to the fact that the most calculated reaction is sometimes no reaction at all, until it is the perfect, final moment to act. The silence that followed was the sound of a kingdom falling, and in its place, something new had a chance to grow.